right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on episode 11 of Slice of Life Sciences. Uh, Today, I'm really looking forward to the episode. I'm joined by Jake Lombardo, who is the co-founder and CEO at Anodyne Nanotech. They're a venture-backed preclinical-stage biotech company developing differentiated transdermal forms of high value drugs. We'll dive a lot more into that. But Jake, just wanted to say thank you for taking the time and really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Excited to dive in.
So we with past entrepreneurs have had a lot of success hearing a little bit about their background prior to diving into what you're up to today, just kind of creating the path to where you are. Does that sound good to you? Just starting from the beginning, then getting into Anodyne?
Sure.
Cool. So I guess starting with the basics, where'd you grow up? Did you have any interests at an early age that started to spark some curiosity in certain industries and certain anything?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up on the Jersey Shore. I like to add the disclaimer, not like the show. But I think what
That would have been my first question.
I know I get it a lot, but it's really not like that. I think what it did do is give me a love for the beach and just kind of being outside in general and fishing on the ocean. So that's my view of the Jersey Shore, not the fist pumping. Um, and I think in terms of interest, at least early on, it was really, broadly described as math and football as kind of my two main interests there. I think as we go through the conversation, you'll see kind of that theme, at least through undergrad college, of kind of how that's led me along. I think a funny story of kind of the cross section of that, though, is at an early age, I think, I don't know, my mom will tell you a younger age, but I was probably around 6. I knew my 3, 6, and 7 multiplication tables because field goals, touchdowns, and touchdowns with extra points. So kind of the intersection of math and football there. But if you ask me, 4 times 8, I couldn't help you.
Well, I was going to say those are two paths that don't normally cross at an early age, math and football. So that's a funny
Right.
story.
But yeah, so that was kind of, early life there.
Did you, I guess, as you still before maybe high school or even in high school before that, did you have any specific people in your life that started to get you thinking about what you wanted to do, what your passions were, any of that stuff?
Yeah, so again, I think this we'll talk about until like a lot later. I didn't have very specific, I want to be a doctor, and that
Yeah.
was what I wanted to be from the beginning of my life. But I do think, obviously a lot of different people have had impacts on my life along the way in terms of mentorship or opening my eyes to different opportunities. I think the first one probably goes back to, I think she taught in like second or third grade through fifth grade. It was Mrs. Lasky. We had there was a group of students. I think it was like 10 of us or so, and we would meet like once a week. And it wasn't a normal class. It was really focused on like logic and problem solving. And we had the same group for like 3 or 4 years, I think. But it was really an awesome class. Made me excited about just kind of approaching new problems and kind of seeking that out. So now, in hindsight, I think it makes a lot of sense. But from that point, it really just I guess nudged me in the right direction of not always accepting things at face value and kind
Yeah.
of if something's presented as this is the way it is because it's the way it is, maybe challenging that a little bit.
It's great. Starting to ask why. Um, so you then went to Union College in Schenectady, New York, for undergrad, and you studied biomedical engineering, I believe.
That's correct. Yeah. It started off as bioengineering, then biomedical engineering, but all the same curriculum.
Tell
Um,
us a little bit about, and you probably were just about to do so, about your time there and just some of the projects you worked on, particular papers, and just anything that started to mold what you were thinking about getting into.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I didn't have a very specific interest going into college yet. I really enjoyed math, so that's kind of what led me generally to engineering. And then at Union, I went in engineering but undeclared. There were four options there. I gravitated towards biomedical engineering just because I really um, I like that better than kind of the electrical or computer engineering aspects. And I really enjoyed some of the biology classes that I took that first year. So I think that helped guide me in that direction. And then within the biomedical engineering, there are kind of three main, I guess, paths you can take within that based on electives that you take. I would describe it more as kind of more of the device side, which is a lot more electrical or computer engineering involved. The biomechanics side, which is more like bone bending, breaking, implants, things like that. And then more of the traditional biology, which ended up being a lot more of where I ended up spending my time, and I think it helps a lot more now as kind of getting into the pharmaceutical side of things and kind of understanding how the body works and really being interested in that. Um, and then in terms of meaningful projects, I guess, well, I did, as I mentioned there, kind of really enjoyed some of the kind of cancer cell biology or immunology classes. I just found them really fascinating to kind of learn how the body works or doesn't work when there's a dysregulation. But I think the most meaningful project was probably my senior capstone for biomedical engineering. And it was set up as kind of a design project with little hints of entrepreneurship in there, if you will, and kind of started getting that going in the sense of it was based on understanding problems that came from feedback from a local hospital, and then being able to design solutions around that. So our actual solution or what we were working on wasn't as important, but it was really the process involved in that I think had an impact on me. So we were specifically working on hemodialysis and trying to make sure that the needles essentially stayed in place throughout diffusion. But through that process, they really kind of challenged us to go out and talk to people, especially doctors. And I remember specifically talking to one nephrologist who was, very well known in the field, had, I think, 20 plus patents at the time. And so he agreed to talk to us, and the entire meeting was super negative. Like basically told us to just give up and stop what we're doing now and go find something else. And it was kind of based on the fact that, he had all of these patents and all of these great ideas, but none of them ever came to anything. None of them were being used. And so it kind of gave him a really negative light on, creating innovative solutions, especially when the last one that he had come up with, I think, added like 5 cents to the system or something like that. So that really was impactful for me in terms of, okay, this is a really intelligent guy, great at what he's doing, one of the leaders in his field, but was failing in this aspect. So clearly there was more behind it than just coming up with a good idea. And so that's kind of, I know we'll dive into it, kind of my motivation for going to the program at Tufts and what kind of led there.
That's interesting. That's a great story. Before we do dive into Tufts, I mean, you mentioned you played football beforehand, and I saw that you were a captain on the team there. As we get to Tufts and Anodyne, just out of curiosity, was being a captain for a football team and playing football your whole life, did you learn a lot of leadership skills, kind of managing different personalities, teammates, obviously, that you look back on and you think maybe in hindsight you learned a lot from?
I think we could probably have a whole separate podcast on this, so I'll try to keep it short. But I do think, whether it's football or any other team sport, it's an incredible advantage in terms of developing those kinds of traits. At least for me specifically, I think there were a few that really come across and still like come through today. I think the first one is probably the most important was grit through that process. So a quick story coming in from high school. I mean, any college athlete, typically, if you're recruited coming into college, you were probably either a star or one of the higher performing players on your high school team. And then coming to Union, there were certain practices where I wouldn't even get a repetition at practice, and so that's incredibly frustrating as a first year. And then the second year, we follow. I actually before that, I had transfer applications filled out actually, and I could never get myself to hit submit because I don't know, something just didn't feel right. It felt like I was giving up. And then the following year we went 0-10, so didn't win a single game.
Wow.
So kind of negative, impact after getting myself to see it through, given something you're all, for weeks, months on end, and then, not winning a single game and then having to go home for the summer and tell all your friends about, how you didn't win a game. So that was definitely a humbling experience. But then after that, sticking through, ended up with a whole new coaching staff. And then by my senior year, as you mentioned, as the captain for that year, and we finally turned it around and had the first winning season. And I think it was like 6 or 7 years. So being able to go through that process, I think, was really important. Just kind of having the really humbling experience, but being able to come through on the other side. And then I think through that, learning what worked and what didn't work from the leaders that were before us, and then captains alongside of us. And that has at least stuck with me in terms of leading by example. I like to, there were a lot of people that would say really great things, but then not really follow through with them. And I realized that, the people that I respected were the ones that would either say something or not, but also give it their best effort and walk through. So I try to bring that to work today as well.
Well, that's great. And I'm sure you took bits and pieces from guys before you and kind of figured out your leadership skills and what worked for you. So that's great. You then went to Tufts, like you were just saying, the Gordon Institute, to receive a Master's of Science in Innovation and Management. I guess what prompted you to go directly from Union to Tufts, and what was your focus at your year at Tufts?
Yeah, so in terms of the motivation, I kind of touched on that at Union. I realized that there was more than just being a great engineer to seeing impact in the world, and that was kind of my fundamental motivation, I guess. I wanted to do something meaningful, and so the MSIM program, it was basically like a warp speed MBA, but it was focused specifically on bringing innovative products or companies to market. So I felt it was a really good fit for, my new revelation, if you will, that I needed to add that component. So for that program, I think it's 80 to 90% of the students have a STEM background, but probably that same large majority of the curriculum is more focused on business aspects. It's not on engineering courses. So things like finance, negotiation, marketing, all of those pieces. But I think one of the main things that differentiated it from some of the other programs I was looking at is an emphasis on really building like an emotional intelligence aspect of it, and really getting out and talking to people and understanding their problems and motivations, and how that factors into building either a good product or a good company. So that was kind of the focus for that year. It was a year and a half.
Yeah, that's a quick program. I can imagine you had to move fast on a lot of different assignments. At your time there, I assume, just based on reading about Anodyne, that you met your co-founder or co-founders there. Um, I guess this kind of parlays into the formation and genesis of Anodyne Nanotech, but tell us a little bit about how the company, I guess, started, how you met your co-founders, and just any professors along the way that helped shape what it is now today.
Yeah, so I guess the formation kind of happened in two parallel streams. On one side, there was the actual invention of the technology and progression there. And that was in Professor Samir Sankasali's lab with research led by now one of the co-founders, Hojat. And that they had worked on that for a couple years before I had been involved or the company formation. And so the other stream was the MSIM program that we were just talking about. And part of that program is building, you know, hypothetical, if you will, in this case, not necessarily hypothetical, but building hypothetical business cases to learn the curriculum. So my team really gravitated towards this microneedle technology that we heard about at Tufts. And so, you know, it was in its infancy a school project that we were able to kind of craft the business plan and pitching and go through the curriculum with that, kind of build the basis of the business there. And then it ended up in the Tufts every year has a 100K new ventures competition. Yep. And so we took part in that. That process was great, not just, you know, the final pitch, but it's a few iterations of pitches and then weeks leading up to it of meeting with judges and mentors and refining. So that process was great. We were able to win a couple awards there, gain some traction, you know, some extra visibility within the Tufts community, at least, to find some people with industry experience that could really give some helpful advice. And so that's when we decided to form the actual company. So that was early 2019. And so those that wanted to continue from the MSIM program, so our other co-founder still with Anodyne is Konstantinos. So myself and Konstantinos from the MSIM program, and then Hojat joined from leading the research. And then Professor Sankasali is also an advisor to the company still. So that was kind of the early formation. And then you also asked about professors in there. I think the main one really, especially for the entrepreneurship, was Kevin Oy, who is the director of the MSIM program, but he also taught a few of the courses and was also just, you know, a great source for advice or guidance along the way. And one of his main pillars, if you will, was that you don't really know what you're capable of until you're pushed to those limits, right? And I think in this sense, he was really great at pushing us to those limits, but also doing it in a way that, you know, when you do push to the limit and fail, that you still have the confidence to pick yourself back up and keep going. So Kevin was definitely instrumental in the formation there.
That quote has a lot of parallels to football as well. So that's a great quote.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was grit on the football field and then grit in the classroom or business formation, and it all comes together.
Exactly. So with the formation story, I guess, so just tell us, what does Anodyne Nanotech do and just what your science technology is.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're focused on eliminating the need for injections in the treatment of chronic diseases. There's a lot of, you know, well-documented cases out there of medication non-adherence. And so it leads to poor treatment outcomes, of course. But we really want to solve that problem by changing injections, whether it's because it's a difficult dosing regimen, it's painful, there's storage constraints, shipping constraints, turning that into a very simple, easy to use patch that you can deliver the same medicine. So we're initially focused on daily or weekly injections and turning that into a patch. The reason we're focused there is you kind of mentioned talking of the technology as well, is that our microneedle technology allows us to deliver large amounts of biologic drugs, which typically is what is delivered with an injection, and especially when we're talking about the treatment of chronic diseases. And so by having this ability to deliver larger amounts of these drugs, it really gives us a unique ability to deliver these types of medicines in a transdermal way. So there are other microneedle technologies. You'll see, especially recently with COVID vaccines, there's a lot getting buzz. And so typically the other technologies are very well suited for the delivery of vaccines because they're very small doses. But when you start talking in the range of milligrams, there's really not another transdermal technology that can deliver biologic drugs, very large molecule drugs across the skin. And so that's where our focus is now.
Is the Hero Patch platform, is that targeted for specific sorts of medicines, or is that just the first platform, and are there going to be more to come?
Absolutely, yeah. So the Hero Patch may take many different shapes, forms over the years to come in terms of the different APIs that we're delivering. The Hero Patch is a delivery platform. And so any new API, any new drug that we work with will have its own Hero Patch. Initially, as I mentioned, focusing on replacing subcutaneous injections that are daily or weekly administration. But that's just the starting point. That's where we see, the technology can fit really well right now, can solve a real need, and is essentially the path of least resistance to solving that problem. But in the future, we also want to expand what we're doing and really leverage the full capabilities of the platform. So some of our early work, we delivered monoclonal antibody. So getting into the delivery of antibodies is definitely something that we see in the future, something that we know is possible. One of the main limitations there right now is how large some of the doses are. So you'll see with these medications, typically, it might be an infusion every month or every few weeks, maybe every few months. And so in the future, we envision breaking that down, and instead of needing to go into the clinic every few months or every few weeks, let's say there's a daily or a weekly patch that you can apply yourself at home. And so this isn't just to reduce the strain on the clinic or improve the convenience, which it would, but really you can start to see better treatment outcomes and perhaps less side effects as well, because instead of delivering all of it at once for less frequent intervals, you really have much tighter control of how much of the therapeutic you're delivering at a given time and maintaining that therapeutic level.
Well, super interesting. I noticed you raised your seed round last year, so congrats on that. Just out of curiosity, are there pharmaceutical partners that you and the team are leveraging or already working with? Then I guess, what was the milestone for that seed round for you and the team in terms of growth?
Right. Yeah. So publicly announced, I guess mid last year. Some of that came in a little bit earlier than that. So we've been making great progress with that. Really excited and about that round. So in terms of milestones for using that, I think the number one thing was building out our team. Really proud of the team that we've built out. Very multidisciplinary, and for something like this, you need that. We have, chemists, biologists, various forms of engineering to help us tackle these problems. We also have lab and office space here in Boston, so we're based here. And then we also have another lab in Greece. So being able to kind of build out that team and our capabilities. And then also really being able to develop the technology further and advance our data packages. So we've gotten to the point now with a couple different molecules of having large animal data. So we're still in preclinical testing, but especially as we're talking for peptide therapeutics, being able to see the PK profile there and understand our our delivery kinetics was really important milestone for us. And then, of course, working with pharmaceutical partners is a major part of our business plan as well. And we've been able to do that along the way. So we have 2 research collaborations with top 20 pharma right now. Those are under pretty strict confidentiality, so I can't go too much further into that. But we are excited to be making that progress, and certainly at the very least validating the need for our technology and being able to work with very reputable companies.
That's great. Shifting a little bit more general, but just given the experiences and stories you've talked about, whether from college and football and some of the more technical side of things, winning a couple awards for Tufts, which I imagine helps with fundraising, etc. How have you juggled hiring, fundraising, managing a team over the past 3.5 years, 2019, 3.5 years or so? And I guess, what are some of the biggest challenges you've had as a CEO? And at the same time, what's come most natural to you? What excites you the most? That was a long question, but
yeah, there's a lot in there. I'll try to unpack all of it. So in terms of, I think you said challenges with hiring, fundraising, managing a team. Hiring is something that we don't take very lightly, and we want to make sure that we put the right pieces in place. I think it goes maybe back to some of the challenges in football you're talking about, but it's not just having, the right talent. It's also having a well-functioning team together. And so we like to, really make sure we're hiring the right people. We don't outsource that to, recruiting agencies or things like that. Even though, quite a few reach out on a daily basis. We try to do our own hiring there. And yeah, that goes into managing the team as well. I think it's also, it's the most important part. It's probably the most challenging part. I think a lot of people you talk to, just because I think, communication is key, and understanding the way that everyone communicates is also very important. Scientists and engineers speak a very different language than investors. And so just making sure you find that balance and how to properly communicate with everyone and make sure everyone's on the same page. It's both a challenge, but very important and very rewarding once you get it right. I won't say that, we're perfect every time, but I like to think we're doing a pretty good job and bringing the team along. Fundraising, that's always a challenge, always a new challenge. And I think different stages of fundraising are also very different too. So, very early on, a lot of angel investors that believed in us, gave us a chance, so we were able to produce some of that early monoclonal antibody data that I referred to earlier. And then just being able to continually make progress and push the technology and the company forward. Fundamentally, I think, it really just comes down to having a problem that you really care about and other people care about, and then having a logical roadmap of how you're going to get there. I don't think anyone expects that, everything you say is going to happen and that we're going to do this perfectly every time, but understanding the thought process and being able to clearly articulate that and knowing that, the meaningful problem is kind of the guiding star in that. And then just finding the right people too. It's not just about capital when you're fundraising. Once you raise money from investors, it's almost like a marriage, right? So it's really finding the right people that you want on your team and they want, in their portfolio as well.
We're running low on time, so I guess we'll close out with a 2-part question that I'd like to. I've asked, I think every founder, co-founder, entrepreneur that we've had on. So I'm always curious to hear the answer. I guess if well, question part one is, would you be surprised to know that you ended up being one of the founders of a company if you, as a 15-year-old, were to find that out? And two, what advice would you give someone in your shoes who's Jake Lombardo, getting his master's, thinking about starting a company?
So for the first one, if I was surprised, I'd probably say no. It wasn't my expectation, but like we said, I didn't really have an expectation. So if you told me that, I would have said, okay, I guess that makes sense. We somehow found a path to that. In terms of advice, I think, whether you're a first time entrepreneur, I guess it's easier coming from my perspective as a first time, relatively young founder. But I think it applies to anyone, is surrounding yourself with the right people, making sure that you have a great team around you, whether that's employees, investors, advisors, even informal people that you just use as a sounding board. I think it's really important. And especially now with everything so connected, I think it's very difficult to do anything alone, or maybe impossible. And then once you have, the right people around you, it's also having the humility to learn from them, not just, putting resumes, in your company, but really being able to take their feedback and learn from them. And then kind of coupling that with finding the themes and then having your own conviction to make those decisions off of those themes. I think that's kind of the main thing there. And then the other thing, especially you're saying, a younger person, is to push yourself to be uncomfortable. Yeah. Because especially in a startup environment, if you're comfortable for too long, you're probably doing something wrong, or not improving or not growing in some way. So be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I know it's cliche, but I think it's really helpful.
They say sharks die when they stop moving. So
I like that one.
Well, Jake, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm really excited to continue hearing about your team, your growth, and I'm sure after all the listeners listen to this podcast as well, they'll enjoy everything you said, and just continuing to stay have Anodyne Nanotech top of mind. So thank you.
Thanks, really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on as well. Enjoyed the conversation and looking forward to following the pod as well.
We'll do a slice of life sciences football podcast next time, like you said.
Okay, I'll be happy to be a guest on that one as well.
Awesome. All right.